Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Susan. Hi, Susan. Hi, Jane. Hi, everyone. And hi, Rob. This is great. What an awesome turnout. That was good. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Mandy Gingrich, and I'm happy to welcome you to the first faculty food for thought session of this academic year. And we're just starting off with a fun session. We're going to hear about how to make learning fun. Who doesn't want that, right? I think we all need that. So I am delighted to introduce James McGrath and Jason Goldsmith and Franny Gaede, who will be talking to us about their work in this area. Take it away. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you all for being here. We have some delicious food, and so I'm really grateful for the fact that we got to choose what to order, and to Franny for selecting Noodles and Company, which I didn't know, but now will recommend for all future events when I have the possibility of doing so. Gamification is something that Jason, Franny, and myself, as well as others, found ourselves talking about. I will save the story of how it happened for another time, not least because I'm not even sure I remember how it got started, but it did. But I think it was around the fact that both Jason and I and Franny all attended Gen Con, and we'll say more about Gen Con towards the end. But there is a gaming convention that happens here in Indianapolis, and it's not unrelated to what we do. And so, gamification, I love that they put speak and spell on the poster. Why learning should be fun. Right? What is gamification, and why should educators do it? Right? There are a lot of different definitions of gamification. Right? One that I came across online is the process of adding games or game-like elements to something as a task so as to encourage participation. For me, in education, I think one that I like is recognition that games and learning inherently overlap in their approach and methods, and thus the attempt to consciously adopt game-like elements to facilitate learning. Right? Why gamify? Because there's actually an inherent educational element in gaming. You're always learning to do something and to do it better if you get better at the game. It may not be something very useful outside of the game, but there is learning, right? And it's woven into it. And so finding out what we can learn, because there is this, oh, the screen's frozen, sorry. I just realized that you weren't seeing what I was seeing. Okay, there we go. I pushed the button earlier to try and freeze it, and nothing happened, but apparently it did. My go-to example is of why we should gamify is the example of players of the game Halo who spent 5 years trying to get into an empty room, simply because it was there and it was a challenge, and they thought it would be fun to try to do this. Right? There are lots of other examples that one could come up with where people lose themselves in gaming in the short term or in the long term, sometimes with detrimental results. But the question I ask myself as an educator is, how do we harness that kind of focus for things that actually have real-world applications? Because Halo takes place in a virtual fictional world, but in that period of time spent getting into that empty room, you could become fairly fluent in a language. You could acquire other skills. And so how do we harness that? Right? So why gamify? I don't know how many of you are fans of existential comics, but one that really resonated with me as an educator was this retelling of this, the classic myth of Sisyphus, right? Forever rolling the rock up a hill. But gamified, right? So when he gets out to the top, it says achievement unlocked, and he gets a sticker, and it changes his perspective on this seemingly endless, dull, meaningless task. Right? So why gamified? Because repetition is crucial to learning, yet can be dull. Regular evaluation of progress is also crucial, and yet can be daunting. Regular rewards provide a sense of accomplishment and encouragement. And one thing that struck me is that, and I think it's important to mention just because it emphasizes an important point about gamification, it's not necessarily about either doing things that you would consider a game in the classroom, or doing things that are really very game-like, but at the very least, learning what we can learn as educators from what games provide that keep people focused in a way that we want to in our teaching. And so one of my favorite language learning systems is the Pencil language courses. And as I was preparing this, I realized One reason I like it is that it does something that games that are well designed do, which is to start you off. It gives you this dialogue, the very first lesson. You can't understand a word of it because you're new to the language. And by the end of it, you can understand it. Right? It gives you these short-term rewards that hook you in. Right? And I've become something of a Pimsleur language course addict. Right? And I put these on my car even when I don't really need to learn a language, just because they're there. And it gives you that sense of accomplishment. Right? You're doing something with your time. The freedom to fail allows for and encourages repeated attempts, which are also crucial to education. And we're going to talk more about that because oftentimes our courses and education in general is set up in a way that each time you do something, it's evaluated and you've got to make it count. Right? And so there's no opportunity to do the thing that is oftentimes most crucial to learning, which is fail over and over again until you get the hang of it. There's this element of flow that is crucial, right? It's the work of Csikszentmihalyi, for those of you who are familiar with it, right? That when there's low challenge, there's possibility of boredom, especially if the challenge is less than the skills. When there's high challenge and low skills, there's anxiety. When we get in that middle zone, we can lose ourselves for hours. And it happens to us as educators oftentimes when we're doing our own research, right? So when we're learning new things, we lose ourselves for hours and hours. We forget to eat. It's the same thing that happens in gaming. Why? Because there's this balance that's achieved between the challenges and the skills and the knowledge that's being acquired. Gaming can also replicate things that want to happen off campus or outside the classroom, hence the Ender's Game screenshot in there. It can simplify complex issues to basic essentials. And stealth education is another one, right? Learning sometimes happens even without you realizing it. And how many of you actually know the Chinese concept of qi? Right? Spelled QI. Right? How many of you know it because of Words with Friends? Anyone? No? Oh. Okay, well this is a select group, but I know that there are a lot of people who've learned that word, who didn't know it before, but discovered that you could put the Q and I together and get a lot of points. And eventually found out that it actually is a word and here's what it means. And so game mechanics are a key element, right? So what is a game? What makes it fun, right? Manageable rules, concrete goals, right? Those are part of a good syllabus as well as a good game, right? Goals that fit player capabilities. Clear and timely feedback, right? Students want that, we want to deliver it. Elimination of distractions. Right? This is from something about gamification, but you'll already recognize that these are things that we try to do. Entertainment, engagement, challenge, all coming together in the right proportions, and thinking about how to accomplish that. Rewards, right? Who's ever spent some time playing something like Mario Bros? You're getting cold coins that aren't actually worth anything in the real world, but there's a sense of accomplishment as that number goes higher and higher. Right? Sometimes we can harness that for learning. Leveling up, right? The popular way of talking about progress. Hiding things in your syllabus, right? Equivalent to Easter eggs. There are lots of different ways that game mechanics already overlap with things that we do as educators, and can overlap in ways that can be harnessed perhaps for greater effect. Right? You can gamify, right, and use game-like elements at a number of levels. One is the institutional level, right? You can have a whole gamified approach to learning at an institution. We won't talk about that. That's above my pay grade and not something that I could be involved in. We have to all agree probably to make that happen. But you can do it at this level of the syllabus, right? So you can have the course be game-like. You can be based on points rather than percentages, right? So that it's cumulative rather than you do this thing and however you do, that's that percentage of your final grade. But you can also incorporate specific games into classes. And one example that I've become aware of recently is Reacting to the Past, which has provided a lot of role-playing game materials for use in educational contexts. So the attempt to understand history through reenactment, and in order to prepare for a reenactment that's graded, you're doing research. Right? You have to, in order to get into character, in order to depict the events effectively and accurately, you have to learn the history. And so there are videos online. I'm going to skip it because I don't think we've got time to fit. There are activities and assignments that can also be gamified, right? So you can have a course that doesn't involve game-like elements at the level of the syllabus, but activities and assignments which do, including role play, debates, and mock trials can basically be a form of game. Right? There are apps and interactive quizzes and things like that. An online scavenger hunt can be essentially learning how to do research. Right? Find some really bad sites. Explain to you why they're bad. Whoever finds 5 good ones first gets this many points or something like that. Board games. I remember seeing one at the celebration of teaching and pedagogy, where there was a game that had been developed for the pharmacy school that basically conveyed, probably in a way that was frustrating to the players, that most people don't have access to healthcare the way a select few do, right? Globally and things like that. And card games, actually brought along for show and tell, actually made a card game in order to try to illustrate something to students. I really started to get excited about it when I realized that you could play the game focused on like biblical canon, but also focused on canon and fandom, right? So what's in and what's out, prequels, sequels, right? The musical episode, right? For those of you who have watched a series that had one of those, fan fiction, comic books. I'm guessing none of you are fans of that kind of. Yours doesn't have your favorite franchise doesn't have a musical episode, or you're just in denial about it. But that's the whole point, right? What's at the fringes of the canon? What's in, what's out? How are these things similar? So I played this with, I think, good effect to generate discussion in my course on religion and science fiction this semester. And there's a video about that online as well if you're interested. Since I'm realizing I'm taking up, I think, just about as much time as I can fairly take, I'm going to hand over to Jason now to come over and give you a specific example of a course that he's taught and gamified elements in it.
Thank you, Jason. So I'm the Luddite here. I have all paper and I don't know how to do PowerPoint. So Shift tab?
Alt tab.
Alt tab.
So,
And I work on a Mac. All right. So, yeah, James and I must have seen on Facebook him make a remark about Gen Con 2015, and I was going to Gen Con 2015 as well. Family Day, they call it Trade Day. For me, it was Family Day. It was like a day that I could go really cheaply and bring my whole family, although my wife and my children did not come along with me. I went by myself. I wouldn't blame them. I did not dress up as any characters. James, I don't think you were. You dressed up Doctor Who-ish? I think it was Doctor Who-ish. I saw him and his family there. But afterwards, we decided to get back together and talk a little bit about, our interest in games and teaching. And I was going to be teaching a class on video games and narrative, which I did teach that semester. So that's one way you can do it. I was the class. There are lots of different ways you can configure a class like that, but I was really using video games to teach students about narrative theory and understand some of the sort of fundamental literary theoretical approaches to considering narrative and narrative theory. We also use narrative theory to help us understand and think about video games, because many of the students in that class wanted to become video game writers. So they were interested in how narrative relates to game mechanics. But what I think is more interesting and more relevant for us as educators is not using games in a class or not using the video games to teach something else, but kind of designing the class itself as a game, right? And that's what I did in several sections of FYS that I was teaching on the Visiting Writers Series and an upper division class on the Visiting Writers Series. So the idea here was to incentivize students through a system in which they earned points, they accumulated points, and they would level up their grade, rather than a system in which their assignments were marked down. So I didn't want somebody to say like, oh man, I only got 6 out of 10 points. What do I need to do to get 10 points? I wanted them to be like, oh cool, I just got 6 more points towards my final grade, right? You would just earn points for these things that you would do. I wanted them at the end of it have a sense of accomplishment with each assignment, focus on what they did right. I wanted to give them the freedom to fail. So I had to make sure that there were enough assignments there that not every single one mattered so much more than all the others, that it was going to create this sort of fear of failure and anxiety. I grew up playing role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, Warhammer Fantasy, role-play. So my sense of game is very heavily determined by that model. And what I'm going to do is just describe the model that I used here, discuss some of the labor involved, because all of us are a little bit worried about that, give you some data, and then talk about some things I learned from the students as well. So basically, there were no, Elizabeth Mix is here. Oh shoot, she's in charge of the core, right? These were first year seminars. There were no required assignments for my first year seminar. I said, absolutely, right? There are no required assignments. Instead, the students would choose, right, which assignments they desired to complete. And I call them objectives or tasks rather than assignments. So that, and they had a certain number of weeks during which they can do these assignments or objectives. The idea was that you would level up your grade. The more assignments, like in a video game, right, where you're marching around, you would kill some monsters, take on some challenge, and you would earn experience points or whatnot. And the more you earn, the more you would level up. So the idea is you would complete these objectives or tasks, they were writing objectives, and you would level up your grade. But I had to come up with a rule set for this, right? I didn't want them turning things in like the first day to the end of the semester. So there were 12 weeks, and I clearly delineated which they were. Once a week passed, that's it. You've lost the opportunity, right? You can't turn in more than one task per week. So you can't wait till the end of the semester and then just turn in 12 assignments at the end of the semester. This is the week. If you want to turn something in, it's got to be here for week 1. So they could do up to 12 assignments. I also had to consider the different kind of writing that I wanted them to do. So there were different tiers or levels of assignments, right? Some challenges in games are harder than others. Some are easier than others. So I had tier 1 assignments that wouldn't ask as much of the students as, say, a tier 3 or a tier 4 assignment. So level 1, tier 1 or 2 objectives, they could repeat it as frequently as they liked. They could have done 12 level 1 assignments if they wanted. Those were capped at 10 points. Right? That's the most you could get out of that. Level 3 and 4, because they were worth much more, point-wise, I sort of needed to limit that so that they could only do each of the specific 3 or 4. And I have examples of what they are up here. Each of those just up to 2 times. So you couldn't do like 5 essays. Level 4 was like a formal literary essay. You can't do 5 essays for this class. It's just not going to happen. And because of the nature of this, right, they could earn more than 100 points overall. One thing to sort of incentivize them, particularly those who did a lot early and were getting close to an A, if they got more than 90 to 100 points, they're in the range for an A. I had a leaderboard where everyone would take a name, and each week I would post, right, the total points that everybody has to see who's winning, and at the end of the semester, whoever accumulated the most points would get a prize. Right? Since it was the VWS class, visiting writer series, I had a poster made that all of the writers who came signed, so they would get that. So here were the writing objectives. Level 1 was, one of the things they could do was an author introduction. You know, if you've been to any of the VWS events, that our students get up there and introduce them. So they could write an introduction. They wouldn't get up there and introduce them, but they would draft an introduction. Right? They could write an event review. Right? What was this writer's visit like? How did the event unfold? Or they could do an ethical reflection. Think about, right, in what ways our discussion of, Nikki Finney's work on sort of the legacy of racism in America today impacts your life, right? How has it forced you to sort of reimagine yourself as a part of this world? So I wanted to give them a variety of different genres or modes in which to write, but that all seemed to me at this level about equivalent amount of effort that they would have to put in. You can see there's about 2 pages, right, of writing. Then you go to level 2, a character interview, right? Pretend that a character in the novel was like an actor in a movie and you're interviewing them. What was it like to work with Lev Grossman, the author? Oh, he was a total pain in the ass. Or, oh, he was so generous, right? He really helped me think about my character and the moral conundrum that he or she is facing. I wanted to give them more creative ways to sort of think about the text, but also help them bring it back to some sort of larger insight that they can take away from that particular work. I'm just going to, a visual translation, anytime my students have to do something creative, they also need to provide an analytical justification or reflection on that. A book review is worth, up to 20 points here. A craft analysis, again, 20 points. A creative response or an extension, say they wanted to rewrite the first chapter of Great Expectations, right? Okay, well, then you have to also sort of explain to me why, right? What is it you're trying to achieve with that? Or a regular essay. I'm not going over all of these in detail because these will change depending on what it is you want to do. I found that I had another one in level 3 that was an annotated bibliography. But for contemporary writers, the kind of writers we're bringing in here, there hasn't been that much substantive scholarship published on these writers. So an annotated bibliography is kind of a useless assignment. And those who did attempt it early on, it was just like, I can't find anything. And so they're like quoting Amazon reviews or Goodreads reviews. I'm just like, no, that's not the kind of stuff we want to be looking at. So I chucked it. Also, I came up with this idea of achievements you were pointing to, right? So if they completed each objective at least once, right, they could earn another 10 points there, right? So a way of encouraging them to try not to just do all author introductions or all moral reflections, right? Because you can earn additional points if you're really exploring the range, the diversity. If you are respectful and ethical in your behavior in the classroom, I wanted to reward that kind of thing. Attend a reading. This is always difficult with these classes. We want to mandate this, the students have to go, but then you get 15 emails saying, oh, I can't go, I have to work, or I have this other class, and the card swipe thing doesn't always work. So I just said, fine, I'm going to incentivize it rather than penalize them. It's mandated they have to go. Every reading that you attend and you take a selfie, click, right, of yourself with the audience and the speaker in the background, and then show it to be the next class, you earn 2 more points towards your leveling up total, right? And you'd be amazed at how many of them come back with those selfies once they're earning points. Also, if they kept a reading journal over the course of the semester to sort of help them reflect and think a bit more, they could earn up to 10 points. So little things, other assignments I might have had them do anyway, a reading journal, and then just giving them check plus. Trying to incentivize it. So that's really the basic structure of this. And it's a lot of labor up front, I have to say. I feel like now that I have this structure in place, I can gamify my classes much more easily. But you have to design the system for your particular class as well as your style of teaching. You have to design a variety of assignments. I did not always have all of these different kind of assignments in the standard FYS class, but you have to give the students choice, right? You want them to be able to explore and try different things, particularly if they can do up to 12 bits of writing a semester, right? You don't want them all doing the same one-page response. I've done that before, and that's really monotonous. You have to think about how to weight them appropriately. Earlier on, right? I had, in this iteration, level 1 was worth 10 points, level 2, 12 points, 3, 20, 4, 25. The previous semester was 10, 15, 25, 30, right? Like everybody had like 130 points by the end of the semester. So I was like, okay, I think they're getting way too many points, and sort of scale it down. So it's a learning process. Here, what I've shown you is, for this class, this is the one FYS section that I had for the whole year. They wrote a total of 135 pieces of writing for me for that class, which is actually a lot. So that means, right, that I'm grading a lot more as well. It's not that I'm getting, there were 18 students, 18 12-page essays at the end of the semester where I'm thinking about research and all of that. It's spread out. You can see, right, that first week before the semester, I had 14 papers, then 15, then 11, 5. So you can sort of, I figured there would be data-oriented people in the audience here. I've got charts.
Jason, was this fun for you?
Teaching the class or doing this?
Reading all those. I mean, we talk about fun. What about our fun?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was enjoyable reading the different things because I'm not reading the same kind of essay over and over that we're trying to do. So like, you know, I loved reading the character interviews that they had. I loved when they were doing a creative extension of something. It was really enjoyable looking at their book reviews where they're assessing whether it succeeds or fails, what the book is trying to do. So the variety made the grading less onerous, but it wasn't, anything less than I would have in a standard class. But that's okay, right? There was more writing in total. But you also have to provide rubrics and models because students don't know what a book review is. They don't know what an introduction is and what it should do. But again, that's all front-loaded. You do that ahead of time and then you hand the things out. The teaching of writing, I didn't teach writing in the classroom as much. I had like 1 or 2 days maybe where I felt there were problems that everyone was making, and so then I could address it. It happened in my feedback, in my comments on the paper. So there's that aspect. But you know, they do more work and they're more writing, but it's because they're failing in some of those tasks. So they need to do more to make up the points. But they feel it's okay to fail because they're not going to fail the class, right? They're learning and then they're applying that knowledge in the next instance of writing.
So Jason, there's 10 points, and you might give them 8 or 2 or 5,
Yeah.
whatever, and it's just points.
Yep, it's just points that you accumulate. 2 doesn't mean you failed it, right? A 2 means you did really poorly on it. I mean, you failed it, but I don't want them to look at it as failing. It's like, okay, I got 2, now what would I do next time to get more than 2?
Did you typically give them a lot of things towards the top end? Or, I mean, if you had an essay worth 12 points, I mean, what were the typical numbers?
I would have to go back and look here. And I could, yeah. I mean, most people are doing stuff fairly well. I mean, I had some students who were crappy and just, you could tell that they weren't really working hard and they would get penalized. But those who were doing it would get, say if it was worth a 15-point assignment, most are getting like around 10 or more.
Right, so
Yeah.
they were significantly short of your top, even the ones that you were counting as good.
Yeah.
Am I reading this right? So there were 12 maximum assignments that they could complete?
In this year, yeah. The second semester in spring, it went down to 11 because, Elizabeth Mix is listening to this, there's a required research component in the first year seminar, and so they did a 12th assignment, but it was a required one. And it counted as a tier 3, but that's not included in any of those numbers.
And that next number, it looks like from back here that they only completed 6 to 7 out of the 12?
Yeah, on average, 6.35. These people did about 7.5. And you can see here, I had 1 student who did 5. 1 student did 6 out of these 18. 7 students did 7 assignments. 6 students did 8 assignments.
That's
2
interesting. They
students
would have
did
thought they
9.
would have all done 12 assignments.
What's that?
I would have thought they would have all tried to max out and do 12 assignments.
No, you'd be surprised.
Students aren't as excited as
And for these guys down here, the literature majors, right? They're much more complacent, and they're kind of like, oh, yeah, this is really great. So here's some things I learned from the students. You can see that one over this is fall. Ian, 6, 6, 7, 5, 8, 6. Oh shit, 11, 13. The semester's almost here, and I only have 25 points. I better really step it up. And notice, look, 7 of those were tier 3 and 4. 8 of those were tier 3 and 4, where you can get more points. So like, the great thing is that students said it's like they enjoyed working at their own pace. I didn't have to turn something in one week because I had a big lab assignment in another class, so I'm able to sort of pick and choose when I need to do things, and they enjoy that. They like the flexibility. They got to write about what they wanted to write about. I really didn't like this book, so I can just do like a little ethical reflection on it that's really, really easy to do. But this book that I love, I want to do an essay or a larger, more substantive assignment on it. And that was really all up to them. They got beneficial feedback, and it was more of a sustained dialogue between me and them as individual writers because they are writing across a semester, more work for me, and it forced self-discipline. That is also the worst thing, the biggest complaint, the drawback for the students is with no deadlines, students don't feel the pressure to submit work and they felt they could get lost, and that did happen to some students. So if I were to do this again, I might say, all right, you need to turn in at least 3 by, week 10 of the semester. A couple of final thoughts is I think you can really adapt these rules. I added a mandatory research assignment, right, in the second semester. You can create sequenced learning pathways or adventures if you want to keep in the gaming model. Say, all right, in order to do this tier 2 objective, you must have completed this tier 1 objective. And then this one could lead you to tier 3 or 4. So you can really shape this as much as you want. You could require you must do at least 1 tier 3 or 1 tier 4 assignment to encourage students to take on more ambitious projects. There are lots of ways to sort of structure these. It just takes some creative thinking, and that takes time, which I know a lot of us don't have, but I found that the students, on the whole, in the evaluations, really appreciated this kind of model, the flexibility that it afforded them, and they didn't feel anxious about doing their work. They weren't worried about their grades. Yeah, Elizabeth?
For the record, this is fine with me.
And now, Franny,
Okay.
we're holding all questions until the end. James said Franny's going to tell you about some really even cooler stuff. Oh, and we have a copy of, there's a secret copy. Show them the secret. If you click on that, you can there's a PDF version of my mechanics that you can just download and make them your own or adapt them. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
So I was a typical librarian here, like, hey, I'm giving a presentation. I should make a LibGuide. So part of my contribution to this is that I've pulled together a LibGuide that has links to a number of things that we've talked about today, including reacting to the past, Microscope, which I might have James talk about a little bit, because that's a really interesting RPG that can be applied in many different areas. Also, games with purpose. You might also see these referred to as serious games on the web. And a lot of these have to do with kind of societal issues. There are a lot of different approaches that these take. I think one in particular that I've seen used before, and I'm just blanking on the title of it right now, but it simulates being on minimum wage and trying to make life work at in that range. And those are the kinds of serious games, and there's a lot of information. Did someone have a name?
No, I was making a joke, but it must be the make sure you go to college game.
Something like that, yeah. But yeah, so these serious games have a huge community online, and this link in particular has a ton of these games with a purpose, and each of them is divided into different categories for different areas. There's education, there's math, there's sociology, there's a bunch of different kinds there. Also here are linked to James, his Canon game, which can actually be purchased online and has been all over the world.
And we played it. It's actually fun.
It is. And it was great. People kept walking by, and I'm like, I swear we're working. We're really working playing this card game here. There were also a couple things that I linked to here because they were based on what I saw when I went to Gen Con this last year. So my first year at Gen Con was actually my first year here at Butler, and I attended with James, and I was not into gaming at all. I attended to go to the Writers' Conference, where they bring in a bunch of science fiction, fantasy, horror authors to talk about their process, what it's like to be in the publishing industry, that sort of thing. And so that was what I attended for. Gen Con is absolutely enormous. You can attend and not even touch a game while you're there. They have an entire group of just sessions, panels discussing issues on religion. They have more on education. It really is an enormous event. And so if you're thinking of it as, oh boy, a bunch of nerds in costume, it's not just that, although it is that too. It really was a delightful time, and it was a great introduction. This is my first year here at Butler when I attended, and so getting to see that sense of community is really exciting. And then this last year I attended, and I went to Trade Day. So Trade Day is the day before Gen Con actually starts, and it is dedicated to game designers for educators and for librarians. And so I thought that was really cool, and I started off going to the librarian track thinking, hey, I'm a librarian, this is great. But it turned out that what it was focused on was on public libraries, which wasn't helping me as much as I thought. So I kind of went to the side and I attended a bunch of sessions on the educator track. And so I wanted to share a little bit of what I learned on that track. One session was called Death to Jeopardy, and was talking about the fact that Jeopardy is kind of an apology for not being more fun. That your class isn't fun enough to begin with, so here's a game as an apology. And also that it doesn't necessarily work as well as it might have, considering it's quizzing people on the knowledge that they already have rather than trying to build further knowledge. So suggestion there was, instead of Jeopardy, think more Pictionary. And that can work with even abstract concepts, because the thought that it takes to interpret an abstract concept into something that you can draw really requires kind of a higher level of thinking. Yeah, it just requires that interpretation there. So another session that I attended was, it was actually a high school class, but I can absolutely see how this could be turned into a PCA course, some other sort of course there, which was actually building and designing a board game, having the student do everything from beginning to end, from coming up with the rules to doing the design for it, that there are a lot of pieces that go into it that involve different, I don't know, everything from pulling together rules, playing different games to figure out like what actually works when you're playing this. There's strategy that goes into it, and then they also brought in local game designers to come talk about the process. So just like Jason was talking about with the video games too, that that there's a whole level of kind of career interest that goes along with it. I thought that would be great too. And also that it doesn't require a whole lot of money to be able to do that sort of thing. That games can be produced really on the cheap, and particularly when you're buying in bulk, it makes life a lot easier. And then one last session that I attended was talking about gamifying the syllabus. And I think we saw this a little bit here. But again, one of the things that was really a problem for the professor who was there was talking about too much leeway and not enough accountability throughout the process. So I think that was one thing that we basically sat and workshopped his syllabus and discussed, like, okay, this is how this works and this isn't going to work here. But that was kind of my takeaway there. The last thing I wanted to talk about, do I have time? Oh, maybe not, was a middle school teacher. And he pulled together an entire year of an RPG, a role-playing game, where the students developed their own characters at the beginning and engaged in this mystery where basically the mystery could be solved by engaging with the text that they were reading in this English class, and that the answer was kind of hidden within the text. And then once they figured out what the answer was, they'd kind of continue in this long-scale mystery that this was built into. So I'd be happy to speak more about this, but I know we're coming up on 12:45, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So.
Yeah. So I'll finish off our presentation here. You can just leave that up, it'll be fine. So, and then we'll open it to questions. Yeah. So most people know about Gen Con. Not everyone knows that there's this trade day, and I want to mention that and highlight it, not least because in addition to this being just something that is fun and interesting that happens locally, this is an opportunity to do faculty development. It's an opportunity to present as faculty, and I'm hoping that we can get Butler well represented at this sort of thing in the future, because there are enough of us who do things like this that I think it's something that we probably want to devote some time to. Right? I want to mention that there are a lot of gamification resources, some of which are linked from Franny. I just went on and was like, can I get a few screenshots of some books about gamification related to education? And there were so many I couldn't fit them all on the screen. I haven't looked at all of these to vet the contents, but just to give you a sense that people are really focusing a lot of attention on this because it's proving to be effective. Right? Students are engaging. They're engaging with history by reenactment and other kinds of gamified aspects that in ways that they don't always engage with history. Right? Those of us who teach things that have an element of history woven in them or are simply history know about this. And so there are lots of resources, and a great place to start is the LibGuide that Franny created. And so let me end by inviting you to send emails. I'll take the responsibility for this. It's JF McGrath, jfmcgrat@butler.edu. If you're interested in gamification and would like to be part of
A working group.
a working group, we'll call it, a network at Butler that is interested in talking more about this, right? Sometimes with food and drinks provided and things like that. When you have a game idea, right? Bouncing the idea off of someone, getting feedback, then play testing it, right? I had an opportunity to try out this game first, and the main reason it's available online is that I found a place that did print-on-demand games that provided templates and other things. So it was the best way to produce something that looked good. I tried through the Butler print shop, and I didn't fail entirely, but I wouldn't have gotten a perfect grade if this was a game-making course that I was part of. But I learned a lot of things. I think the end product was better. But having put it somewhere online where I could order copies of it, I let other people know about it, and I've had other faculty from the UK as well as the United States, other places, ordering this because they thought it sounded like an interesting idea. There are lots of resources available. There are grants available. There are organizations focused on utilizing some of these resources. And so if you're interested in talking more about this in any way, shape, or form, possibly getting food and drink out of it, possibly even getting grants and things so we can work to develop some of these things, send me an email and we'll try and make sure that there's regular, but not overly regular, communication about gamification. Well, thank you for your attention, and let's now open it up to questions.
I gotta ask Jason, I love the visualization assignment. Did any of the students approach you about doing a video?
No.
Okay. Would that be something that could...
Farhad, who's sitting right next to you, I remember I had a sort of creative translation assignment way back when you were in EN 266, I believe that is, or one of our sort of surveys. How many years ago now was that, young Farhad? 7. Farhad just got engaged, everybody, to somebody he met. He did a wonderful video exploring the sort of urban space of Indianapolis and sort of race and class, translating the work of Marx and Engels. So yeah, I mean, people have done videos before, not in this context, though, not in this class they haven't, but that's, a creative extension of it would be a great idea.
Carol?
Well, I'm sort of thinking about the broader implications of the gamification of life in general and of our professional lives. So we fill out our fires, why don't we just give ourselves points? Like we have a level 1, which is being on a committee that doesn't involve very much work. Level 2, serving on the Senate, but not participating in level 3, serving on the Senate, or going to the Senate meetings. Giving a student a C could be a level 3. And then I'm sitting with these healthcare folks. So you have a doctor who saves a patient, 1,000 points. A doctor who loses a patient, you lose your 1,000 points. You stay married for 50 years, 50 points at the end of your life. Let's see how many points you made over your whole lifetime. I mean, to me, it's kind of interesting to think about the whole effect on the psyche of students who think in these terms, and then how much we can start to think in these terms, and whether that's a good thing or not.
Well, the first thing that I thought of was that, I mean, when we fill in the FAR, we're doing it more for points than for like a raise or something like that, right? But that's a separate.
Mario coins.
That's and we level up, right, from assistant professor to associate professor, and some of it is just a matter of terminology. But recognizing that students are familiar sometimes with that terminology and sometimes more comfortable with it than other kinds of terminology. And so sometimes it's just a matter of speaking language that students get or get in a different way because it's familiar from a different area. But obviously the question of whether either getting the most raises or getting the most points at the end of one's life ought to be a goal is the kind of thing that actually you can sort of do meta level analysis, and if you have a course that is gamified, you can ask questions like, so what's involved in gamifying, what works, and where does that, is that ever counterproductive to your learning?
Yeah, I mean, you need to do a longitudinal study, right? Over the course of 6 years or something, like, do students who have taken this version, a gamified version of an FYS, VWS class, have they learned more or less? Or what is different in the sort of nature of their learning? We just don't know.
This is such a good question, and this is so great, by the way. Thank you so much. But the thing that strikes me about this, the reason why, even though this looks like a horrible amount of work, I'm so tempted by it, is one of the things that is so frustrating to us is grades. And one of the problems with grades is it's like, did I get enough for an A and all that? And obviously we need to build some way into that system, but ultimately, leveling up, when I think about education, that's what I'm thinking about. How do you move from, philosophy acolyte to philosopher king, and if we can get them to, to a level 3 by the time they're graduating, that's good. And so that's a better way of picturing what we're trying to do. And you don't want to say to somebody who you give a high grade on a paper as a freshman that's, it's a good paper for where they are, right?
Yeah, for a level 1 paladin.
Exactly.
Once you meet the Demogorgon, you're
so
still
somehow creating that image that what we're doing is we're helping you through the course, but frankly, I think this is more powerful through the program of leveling up. Cool.
Yeah.
Can you give me some terms to use to talk to my colleagues about this so they won't look at me funny? I'm worried about.
Who are you and what's your discipline?
I'm sorry, I'm Adam Osmond. I'm teaching chemistry, and this is very interesting to me, and I'm very, very much thinking about doing this, but I'm concerned that my colleagues are going to give me one of those looks.
Oh, well.
Well, I'd say that, on the one hand, whenever you try new things, there are some people who are going to be supportive, and there are some people who are going to give you funny looks, and, we need to be okay with that. And we need to, this is the sort of thing, precisely the sort of area where, it's the kind of thing that we as faculty will try and fail, because one way of doing it simply won't work as well in terms of the student learning that we're trying to accomplish, right? And one of the things that always strikes me, I'm sorry if you've heard me mention this before, but when we hear words like assessment, we respond in a way that is like the way our students respond when we mention the things that we call assessments, right, of their work and what they're accomplishing. And yet we're frustrated when they respond in the same way that we respond, right? For the most part, I found Butler is an institution that is happy for us to try things, and when they fail, if we can say, the student evals were low this week, or the grades were off, or whatever happened, because we were trying something new that we thought would be conducive to student learning, and it didn't work, but I learned something from it that I will then take into account next time. On the whole, the institution, from the administration through to most colleagues, are supportive of that sort of thing. I find it to be that sort of environment. Now, I must confess I don't know the chemistry department as well, but I know some of your colleagues enough to think that they could probably be gotten on board with this.
Well, you're trying to find ways to engage students where you're incentivizing their activities, where they're accumulating, where they're earning things, rather than, it's a more punitive model. Like, okay, you got a test and all of these things got taken away from you. You've lost points. How you do that is still unclear. I mean, because you need to give tests. But I've been Googling like role-playing games and education and syllabus and teaching. And I think there were some that were science-y related that I can go through and see if I can find them again and send them to you.
Yeah.
Because all sciences are the same.
Call it recreational chemistry. It'll work.
But yeah, I'm actually struck by the fact, I'm reminded of the fact that there is this program that, basically it's crowdsourced, the folding of proteins even to people who don't know anything about proteins, but you're working with shapes, right? And in the process of doing that, I mean, it's made this thing accessible to other people. But sometimes people who think, I can't do chemistry, you give them some shapes on the first day of class, get them working, and then say, actually, you've just been doing chemistry. You may have gotten them over an important hurdle by using that thing that is game-like in certain respects.
And sometimes when you try something new, what's happening is you're scaring the rest of them who haven't tried anything new for a while. And so that may just be them trying to simmer you down a little bit so they don't look so bad. I'm just saying.
Any other questions?
There was a essay in the Times on Sunday by a professor who has decided for his final exam that students would get together in groups and they would help each other. They would do study guides for different areas and they worked as a team to prepare for the exam. Maybe our students sort of do this, but he built it into the course. So it could be that they could create a card game over the concepts to study for the final.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about, next time I teach the survey, a discussion of canon and canon formation, like why are certain writers, I've got a whole bunch of 19th century anthologies, bring them in, talk about, well, I'm a professor, I chose this anthology, but there are also these two other anthologies on the market. How do they differ? How do these differ from anthologies 15 years ago? Why are these writers on your syllabus and the other ones aren't, right? Well, I've left them out, and then we can sort of play his card game in the sort of British Romantic version, right, of that, just so that they understand, like, how canons are, contingent and how they're always in flux and they change a little bit. So it would be, a way of using a game in a class to demonstrate a principle, and the whole class does not need to be gamified, but I think, that's what's exciting about this, is it can happen in so many different ways. Thank you all.